So, I find every year we change topics to try to keep it fresh so you people don't fall asleep on me too much, and some of you actually like to come back year after year. And this year I decided to do, in honor of our new president, I decided to do presidents and their connections to trees. So as we go through the Arboretum, we're going to see some tales of our first Quaker president. Anyone know who that is? Yeah. Hoover. Very good. Who said that? Herbert Hoover. And unfortunately, Herbert just gets a tree stump. We're going to talk about Herbert and tree stump. But he did what was called the tree stump diplomacy. We're going to talk a little more about Hoover and his connection to trees. We're going to talk about Grant. We're going to talk a lot about Ohio President's Day as much as possible. And we're also going to talk about our early founding fathers. For instance, I'll bring this up because as we're standing underneath this magnificent grove of trees right here, James Madison, I think, should really have the definition of being our founding father for American conservation. Madison was so concerned about the disappearance of old age forests in the eastern United States, he permanently set aside a 40-acre chunk of woods that was never to be touched, never harvested, never have wood taken out of it for firewood or anything. And that 40-acre plot to this day still stands and still managed on the Madison estate as an old growth, no-touch forest. Now that's pretty amazing that someone back then actually thought that far ahead, I think, that this is something that should be preserved, and they were concerned that this was going to disappear. But we've got some other presidents that's got some really ties to trees and really have some interesting stories. And one guy is a cigar-chomping Ohio general. I'll give you a little hint. We'll talk about him at the end. And you might be surprised what Mr. Grant contributed to tree planting. So let's start down this alley. We're going to stop up here just a short distance. So, the father of our country, George Washington. What's these two little shrubs on both sides of me have to do with Washington? Well, if you look real close, you'll see there's these delightful little red berries. This is spice bush. And when George Washington was a young man walking around surveying the wild Ohio and Kentucky countries, he became very fond of spice bush because he thought this was an indicator of soil fertility. Now, unfortunately, I've seen this grow in some pretty rocky soil, so I don't know if he was very good at figuring out what was great. But you have to understand something about Washington. Part of the reason Washington becomes so important to us is he had this vitality, this strength from all those years of tromping around in the backwoods. Now, this unfortunately leads to a scandal because at the end of the Revolutionary War, they decide that since they can't pay the officers, the enlisted men that fought, they're going to give them land. And so they could take land or they could wait around to see if Congress was ever going to appropriate money, which is a whole nother story in itself. So some guys took land and sold it. But what's funny is everyone that knew Washington, all the officers, all without even setting foot, they all took the prime real estate. Wonder how that happened. Yeah. So we think there was a little, Washington was kind of saying, hey buddy, that's a real good spot. You want to pick that one right there? And that one's junk. Well, by the time the average soldier got into Kentucky and Ohio territory, all the good spots were taken. So would they get left? Hilltops, rocks, areas that were not very productive. And a lot of those men were forced to ultimately sell land because it was so unproductive they could not make a living off of it. To this day, the highest number of Revolutionary officers in any cemetery in the United States is where? Nope. Starts with an M, it's in Ohio. Marietta, Ohio has the highest number of Revolutionary officers of any cemetery. And that's because They were all coming for land because Washington said, look at all the spice bush. This land's really fertile. Yeah, they all came running in because Washington told them that this was great land. So there's your spice bush. Now, if you pass around the leaves and smell it, it's got a very distinctive smell. And these, they actually used to pick these berries because this was important for another reason. They made allspice out of these berries. So this was actually their solution to, especially, you know, we had that little disagreement with the Brits. Small little disagreement, yeah. And obviously some things dried up, and allspice was one of those. So this is what they were using as a substitute for allspice. All right, so we have a black locust here, little one. We just planted it. We have a couple of bigger ones we'll go by a little bit later if you want to see what they're bigger. So how does this tie in to what you're standing under? Well, we've all heard of Thomas Jefferson, right? Monticello. This feature you've been walking down with the bald cypress is a French horticultural term called allée. And they used to plant trees very close together, and they used to make these beautiful screens. If you want to see Mr. Jefferson, see, I could say I saw him, but there's people older than me, so I can't even use this joke on this one. You know, if you wound your way up Monticello 4 times, you went through at least 3 allées that Mr. Jefferson used black locust. I don't know why he used black locust. It's got little thorns on it. I don't know if it was to keep people from hiding in there. It makes great fence posts. It's fantastic firewood. It actually has more BTUs in it than oak does. So, but the problem is, if you don't cut it when it's green and you let it season, you can't cut it. Yeah, I mean, I actually burned up a chainsaw one time trying to cut like 10-year-old black locust. Yeah, you're nodding your head. You know better. See, you're much smarter than what I was. But this idea of planting these, you know, allées, you know, Jefferson loved everything French. And when the French Revolution starts, Jefferson goes, pawpaw, that's nothing. So a couple heads will roll. And one of the things that Hamilton constantly stuck in Jefferson's eye during his life was, yeah, you said nothing had happened bad with the French Revolution. You know, and of course, you know, Jefferson would go at Hamilton with all kinds of interesting things too. So the word allée, eventually the English get a hold of it. And what do the English do? They got to anglicize it, right? So they're trying to figure out a term to describe these new cities they're building and these narrow little walkways between buildings, and they anglicize it to alley. So the word alley today is actually a French horticultural term, allée, that they just anglicized and they made it. So, yeah, so you can kind of thank the French for loaning that to us. So, okay. You know, Thomas Jefferson was a very interesting person. He's the first president that plants a tree at the White House. And he doesn't do it in typical style, right? He plants a grove. He doesn't want one. He puts a whole grove of trees in. He was very interested in trees. Jefferson, shortly before he dies, a young man asked Jefferson, what's the greatest aspiration anyone can have? Jefferson's comment, to find a new plant or a new use for an existing plant. Now this is the guy that writes the Declaration of Independence, founds the University of Virginia, is the father of American horticulture. I mean, he truly is the father of American horticulture. He experiments with so much stuff that we don't actually know what some of the results of his crossbreeding programs were. If you ever have a chance to go to Monticello today, oh, do it. They've restored his gardens. I mean, he, you know, designed his gardens so they face south. He put a stone wall so there was heat retention there, so he could have a longer growing season. He had glass bells made so he could start things earlier and put the glass jar or bell over top of stuff to get things going. They're slowly recreating a lot of his stuff, but there's a peach that he loved in France so much. They can't get the thing through quarantine. It dies in quarantine. It's called a Venus, and it's a white peach, and he loved it. His favorite pear was a sickle pear. If you don't like pears, grow a sickle pear. It has a honey fruit taste to it. It doesn't even taste like a pear. It's a little pear. I can't say it makes good alcohol, but it does. It's an interesting base for alcohol, I would think. Anyhow, so Jefferson does all this experimentation, And Jefferson's grove of trees today is the basis for Lafayette Park eventually. So it kind of goes away from the White House. But one of the interesting things about the White House is, do you realize the ground surrounding the White House is a national park? How many knew that? Yeah.
I live there.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple. Okay, John knows that too. Yeah, okay. And I think that's astounding to think the president's surrounded by a national park. I mean, that's kind of neat in itself. So, but Jefferson's this amazing guy. We're going to talk about the feud here shortly between Washington and Jefferson, what happens, and we're going to talk about a tree I can't believe they actually left standing. Martha didn't have cut down, or George didn't have cut down, but we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So this is our Scarlet Oak, and I think this is the saddest tree we have. Not that I don't like the tree, it just got planted. But this is the saddest story of a tree that I think we have in the Arboretum. USS Maine blows up in Havana Harbor. And we think we have journalism problems today. You know, we talk about bias of the press, or some of us feel the press is biased one way or the other. Think back to Spanish-American War. You have people like Hearst that is actively involved in what we call yellow journalism, right? That was very slanted. And so McKinley is being pushed toward a war. The Maine blows up, and McKinley goes out and plants a Scarlet Oak between the White House and the War Department. Now, it doesn't seem like much of an act today. What's sad about it is, I think it demonstrates what's going to happen to McKinley in a very short time after he puts this tree in. First thing is, I really am curious what McKinley was thinking, you know, putting a Scarlet Oak in. Was that a symbol that he thought this was going to be a very long, drawn-out, bloody conflict? I don't know. But when he goes out, he has a gardener go with him and one bodyguard. So how is this symptomatic? What's going to happen? Well, the symbolism, I think, happens is McKinley's assassinated shortly thereafter. He goes to Buffalo to the exposition, and his security detail tells him, do not do a receiving line. You put yourself in danger. And McKinley wanted so much to stand in a line and shake everybody's hand that wanted to shake him. That's where McKinley's ultimately assassinated and hit and killed. There's a physician that could actually have treated McKinley at the time that was in the middle of a surgery, and a person barges into the surgery room in Buffalo and says, you're needed to urgently work on someone. And the physician says, I don't care if the President of the United States, I'm not finishing the surgery. Nobody ever tells his surgeon that it was literally the President of the United States that needed his attention. So he finishes surgery, and he never asked. Everybody said, oh, guy said he wouldn't even work if it was the President of the United States. And McKinley ends up succumbing from his wound because, you know, we think because if, you know, he wasn't treated promptly. So he ends up dying from the wound. And of course, who's his vice president? Yeah. So Roosevelt takes in, and then we suddenly have this great expansion of national parks, and we have this, you know, view of, you know, federal parkland, and this whole idea of the great untamed American West that, you know, people should go out and be involved in. But we're going to find out that Roosevelt was not the most influential conservation president. We'll get to that here in a couple of minutes. So let's talk about our first Quaker president, American president. I'm sorry. Don't want to make that mistake again, right? Yeah, Herbert Hoover. Yeah. He gets a lot of bad press, doesn't he? Like he's ineffectual. He's really not very good. He ends up, you know, leading to all kinds of financial problems within the country. But Hoover is really our top conservation president. During Hoover's administration, he added more federal parks, parkland, forest, and general lands to the public domain than any other president before or since. So where we think that Roosevelt's really the big conservation guy, it's actually Hoover. And if you want the experience, there's a tree stump right down next to Lido Creek. So let's talk about Hoover and his tree stump diplomacy. So if you want to go down there and imagine your Hoover fly fishing in the Shenandoah National Park, what's now the park today, Hoover would bring these people in, and he practiced what was called tree stump diplomacy. Now, Hoover was orphaned when he was quite young, and an uncle took him in, and his uncle treated him more like he was a servant or a slave than like his own son or a member of his actual blood relative. So his uncle ends up sending him out to Oregon, and Hoover works burning tree stumps out and working in sawmills and cleaning up after cuts and things like that, forestation operations. So Hoover starts at a very young age kind of being close to the land. Eventually, he, as president, the federal government offers to buy land for him so he could create a lodge to go. This was pre-Camp David, obviously. So he could go and get out of Washington and relax and entertain foreign dignitaries. Hoover, being a man of principle, says, no, I have my own money. I'll build my own lodge and I'll buy my own property. So he finds a really nice little stream that's got trout in it, and he builds his own lodge, refuses any federal money whatsoever to buy this land, creates Shenandoah National Park at the same time. And he buys right on the edge of Shenandoah National Park at the time, and he has his little favorite stream. So one story is the Prime Minister of England. The first time a Prime Minister of England visits the United States since the little spat we had. So he comes over, and he shows up, and Hoover announces to him, we're going fishing. And the guy says, I didn't bring any clothes. Hoover goes, you're already packed. And the guy says, oh, but I really didn't bring any clothes. Hoover says, I already know your size. We're already packed. And drags the Prime Minister, screaming and yelling, out of the White House, throws him in a car, and they go to his lodge. And for 3 days, they sit on a tree stump, fly fishing in this creek, and Hoover works out the largest disarmament program at that time until Ronald Reagan with the nuclear program with Gorbachev. And he does this, these two guys sitting on a tree stump, kind of like that one down there at Lido Creek. No trout though, sorry, you're out of luck. I mean, we can get somebody to put a trout costume on, I guess, if you want to act like you're swimming, you know. But, you know, even a tree stump can be useful for diplomacy. And, you know, Hoover, I think, really shows I think what's inspirational so often about the Quaker belief is you don't have to be complex to get things done. Sometimes it's the simplest art of just listening and communicating that really accomplishes more, doesn't it? So yeah, I think you know, Hoover has a bigger place in our history than what we give him credit for. All right, so this is a tree you normally don't associate with Ohio. This was put in this spring. Now I'm going to give you two pronunciations of this, and it all depends where y'all from. This is either a pecan or a pecan, okay? And we don't associate pecans or pecans as being an Ohio tree. They are here. They're here in very limited numbers, and they're along the Ohio River. There's actually some amazing stands of this right where the Ohio and the Mississippi River come together. Illinois has some amazing stands. Just like they have in the same area, we went through, and when we started the bald cypress, same areas, they have that. So what's this got to do with presidents? Well, there are 3 trees left at Mount Vernon that we know George Washington planted. I don't think George Washington actually planted them. I just think, you know, he like told one of his slaves to go out and plant them. But anyhow, for sake of argument, we'll say George supervised. There are 2 tulip poplars, which are still alive at Mount Vernon, and there is northern pecan tree. Now this was a gift from Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson gives Washington this tree, and Washington has it delivered to Mount Vernon and planted. This is when they were still on friendly terms. So what happens? Well, I should have warned you all, there's going to be a little history in this program if you haven't figured it out yet this year. So Jefferson and Hamilton don't get along. We all know that, right? Yeah, they have opposing views. And it gets so bad that Jefferson and Monroe and Madison start to get paranoid that they think Hamilton's got Washington's a year too much. So Jefferson begins to write a series of letters underneath somebody else's name, and Benjamin Franklin's one son just happens to run a newspaper in Philadelphia. So he starts publishing them. And Washington is like absolutely beside himself. I mean, he's actually sitting in cabinet meetings going, I don't know where they get these ideas. And there's two guys sitting at the table and know right where they're getting these ideas because they're the ones penning the letters. Washington ends up finding out. And Washington, very coolly at a cabinet meeting, looks at Jefferson and says, yeah, I understand someone's been saying bad things about me. And Jefferson knows the gig's up, and shortly after, Jefferson resigns from the cabinet. Some say it's because he wanted to run against Adams as president, but I think that he realized that his goodwill with Mr. Washington was done. The rift becomes so bad, Washington will not even say Jefferson's name. He's like persona non grata. But for some reason, I don't know, this must have been one hell of a tree he gave him because he never goes and cuts it down. Even after George dies, Martha cannot stand Jefferson. Jefferson attempts to honor Washington when he's president. Martha won't even acknowledge it. And I'm surprised Martha didn't go out and have him saw the tree down. So it must have really been a good pecan tree. So that's the story of the breakup of Mr. Washington and Thomas Jefferson. All right. This little guy right here, this is a honey locust. If you look at it very closely, it's really thorny. It's got 3 thorns. It's got one main thorn and a couple of small thorns. If you want to have fun tonight, you go home, look up a picture of Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. And over, depending what angle, over Lincoln's one shoulder, there is a honey locust that is still there, living today in Gettysburg National Cemetery at the park site. This is the only living thing we know that was actually present, that actually went through the battle and actually was there at the Gettysburg Address. Now, I think what's kind of ironic is when you look at this plant, remember the 3 thorns? I think what's kind of interesting is to realize that, you know, I like to think the main thorn was the subject of slavery, but then the 2 smaller thorns were also, you know, this idea of states' rights and individual rights. And it's funny because we're right back to the same thing today, aren't we? Yeah. Where states are protesting, the feds think they should have more rights. So it's funny how history kind of keeps going around and around in a big wheel. And, but that's our honey locust. That's a new tree that we just put in this spring. So sorry it's not very big yet, but if you want to get the point, you can walk over and, you know, grab it. So, all right, I'm going to do a 2 for, well, actually, 2, maybe a 3 for 1 here. So this is our Chinese chestnut. This obviously is not native, but this is going to be our stand-in right now for the American chestnut. Now, a lot of us know the American chestnut. You know, it basically got wiped out by, you know, blight. And what makes the American chestnut so amazing? Well, let's go back to Lincoln. So Lincoln's father, there's 7 presidents that are born in log cabins. Lincoln is one. Lincoln's cabin, we know, is made from American chestnut. Now, you know, you think, okay, that's kind of amazing, but not really, because it was all over the place. But American chestnut has a unique quality. It's rot resistant. So when you go over most covered bridges in the eastern United States, they used American chestnut for all the major timbering in covered bridges because they knew the bridge wouldn't rot. So same thing, you come up with a house, you don't want to rebuild the thing every couple of years, right, because it's rot, so you use American chestnut. So Abraham Lincoln's father on the farm in Kentucky goes to Kentucky and buys 40 acres. And we're going to go buy a white oak tree up here in a couple of minutes, and I'll just point that out to you. Back when they were surveying, Kentucky, and I don't know why, Kentucky had no federal protection or any kind of federal law regarding surveying in Kentucky. Now, this doesn't sound very important, but it all comes back to a white oak tree. Because what happened was, ultimately, 4 people claimed the farm or pieces of the farm that Abraham Lincoln's father had paid for. All 4 people paid money for this land. And it all revolved around a lone white oak that was used as a marker post. And people couldn't get directions. Everyone thought the white oak, because one person used the white oak in this rock, another person used the white oak in a different tree. So the intermingled land claims got to be so bad that they went to court in Bardstown, Kentucky, and Abraham Lincoln's father lost. He left, and this is why the Lincoln family ends up moving to Indiana, because Indiana had federally protected land surveying. So if you had a problem and you had first deed, you were guaranteed that, it was your property. So Lincoln dies, and this is where it gets interesting. So after the American Civil War, this guy buys Jefferson Davis's cabin. Who's Jefferson Davis? Okay, President, Confederacy, and buys Abraham Lincoln's cabin, right? So he's taking these cabins down apart, and he's going to state fairs. He's charging people like a nickel to go in through Jefferson's cabin or Lincoln's cabin. And he does this for several years. And then all of a sudden, Jefferson Davis's cabin just disappears. So, and Lincoln's cabin's left. So we're thinking that, they put the two together. So we think that the cabin you go to today at Knob Creek is actually probably Jefferson Davis's and Abraham Lincoln's cabin. And then to add insult, when they went to build what's really called the first Lincoln Memorial, is where his cabin, his birthplace cabin's at. Somebody should have got fired for this. They messed up the measurements, so they had to cut like 4 foot off the cabin. So it's not even the size of the cabin that Lincoln was born in. He was actually born in a bigger cabin. So that's the sad story of Lincoln and Jefferson Davis's cabin. So we're going to look up the hillside, and we have our Walnut Grove up there. And just for the thing of time here, I'm going to cover this. Walnuts were obviously extremely important to early settlers. And Harrison, before he's president, he's in charge of Northwest Territory. He's governor. And he lives in Indiana. He plants this huge walnut grove. And in that walnut grove, he eventually tries to get Tecumseh to come and make peace. Now, this is a story of kind of someone that starts with, both men are involved in wood in one way. Obviously, Harrison, a military man, he builds Fort Meigs up in Perrysburg, War of 1812. He's a little smarter than the British. He digs these 2 big pits running down, puts logs over and dirt. And the British and Native American allies try to lay siege to Fort Meigs twice, and they can't take it because Harrison's a little smarter. And Tecumseh is so upset, he even says, "How can you fight men that live like groundhogs?" Because every time they start shelling the fort, everybody runs into what they call the Grand Traverse. They're not dumb. They don't want to get hit. So they leave a handful of men in the blockhouses just to make sure nobody can sneak up. And so Harrison, defends this. And Harrison ends up, winning ultimately. So the sad tale is Tecumseh. So Tecumseh meets Harrison, and Tecumseh doesn't like Harrison, and Harrison doesn't like Tecumseh. So they try to parlay in this black walnut grove at Vincennes, close to the border of Illinois and Indiana today. And they're not getting any place. The only thing they do is they just put the upcoming war on hold for a couple of years. And eventually, Harrison ends up chasing Tecumseh. He goes into Amherstburg. He crosses, goes into Canada. The British at Amherstburg throw up their hands and they give up Fort Malden, and they basically take off. And Tecumseh stands on a rock that's still in Malden today, in Amherstburg, and he says, "You are cowards. You should stand and fight. You have a fort." Tecumseh is killed at Thames, Ontario. And Tecumseh is buried at a large sycamore tree. The Shawnees come back to claim Tecumseh's body, and there was a flood, and the marker tree was washed away. He's there at Thames. They never have found him. They searched for several years after his death, and everybody thought they had an idea, where it was. And they never did recover Tecumseh's body and bring it back to Ohio. So he is still up there in Thames, Ontario to this day. So it's kind of the story of, you know, one's using trees to build. And in fact, the guy that built, here's a little interesting history tidbit. Wood County, Ohio, that I'm from, is named after Woods, the engineer that built Fort Meigs. He has the only monument to a civil engineer at West Point is Woods. That's it. Everybody else is a soldier at West Point except for him. So there's a little military history. Well, this is where I get to Grant. So Grant, you know, we have this image of this cigar chomping, whiskey drinking, drunk. Actually, they said he didn't drink. That was a story that was being passed around. And Grant, actually, believe it or not, is really emotionally distraught during the American Civil War. He loves to get on his horse, and especially if he can get on his horse with his wife and take a ride through the woods. And we don't see Grant as this nature-loving guy, but he actually really loved riding in the trees and all that. And he was beside himself during the American Civil War because he couldn't believe how whole landscapes were stripped for telegraph poles, for, you know, building defense stuff, for firewood to, you know, cook and clean camps and things like that. And he's reported a couple of times actually going out on battlefields and looking at old surviving trees that were not cut and almost crying to see the destruction that these trees had taken during some of these pivotal battles, filled with bullets, shot, you know, shrapnel, whatever. And he was beside himself. So he becomes president, and he does something that starts kind of the forestry movement. He opens up the West. And what does he do? He signs into law that if you move out in the prairie states, you get 160 acres, but with a catch. The catch is you have to have a 40-acre woodlot at least. Now, this doesn't sound like much. And in this day and age, I think we all kind of get jaded by the politicians promising stuff, and we go, okay, yeah, big deal. But a lot of those woodlots, or descendants of those woodlots, are still in existence out west today in the prairie states, even today. They may not have the same trees in them, but they were still managed as woodlots. So Grant learns from the American Civil War that you've got to have trees, and especially when you're out on the prairie and you have limited wood to start with, you've got to have firewood to cook. You've got to have trees to work with. You know, the tree shortage, we don't see it in Ohio, but when we begin to start this agricultural push out west and we get to the steam age, they actually create special engines that they refer to as straw burners. And they had a modification in them because they didn't want to burn wood. So when they would thrash wheat, they'd actually have crews pick up the straw, and some little kid, here's the little kid's job, stand with a stick all day and go like this and jam the straw into the boiler to burn for heat, because to preserve your firewood was that crucial. So, you know, firewood and wood in the prairie and the plains becomes really important, and Grant attempts to do this. Now, Grant finally, you know, I mean, Grant's not one of our stellar presidents, right? Okay. So Grant eventually starts traveling. And Grant goes and sees people like, if you're from Toledo area, we have Rutherford B. Hayes, right? So he starts the first presidential library in Fremont, Ohio. And he has this beautiful grove of trees. And every time somebody comes to visit him, what's he do? He's not like Jefferson where he has pet trees. Jefferson never has a favorite tree. He just has pet trees. Rutherford B. Hayes starts putting little brass plaques. So Grant comes one day and says, wow, I really like this tree. Next day, boom, there's a plaque on it. Grant's tree. Yeah, you know. So all these people, it gets so bad that Howard Taft comes to see him. Now, Howard Taft's a pretty big guy, right? He's getting out of the carriage and falls and slams into a tree. Next day, there's a plaque on it, Taft's tree. So I asked somebody that's a historian for Taft, I said, how did Taft take that? He said, Taft had a great sense of humor. He probably thought that was great that he had a tree he fell into named after him. But Grant, for some reason, turns out to be this, he's probably our planningest tree president. He starts touring the world, and every place he goes, he ends up with a shovel in one hand, a tree in the other. And so he plants trees in Japan and Russia and Europe and all over the world. And at the end of his life, when he dies, the international community is so respectful of Grant that outside of Grant's tomb, to this day, there is a ginkgo tree planted. And that is symbolic to a nod to Grant's accomplishments of traveling and all the trees that he planted around the world is the ginkgo tree. So this is our last tree, and no big hurrahs or anything, okay? You'll hurt my feelings. But anyhow, this is the American yellowwood. If you watched my video from last year, you know a little about American yellowwood. It's not a common tree any place it grows. Even the Smoky Mountains, where it's a little more common, when you do find it, you find little clusters, and they're usually along streams. What's really neat about the yellowwood is that, oh, of course, that's not going to cooperate. Okay. Murphy's Law. If you're familiar with, like, ashes and anything that's got a compound leaf, the leaflets are always across from one another, right? This one's not. This is the only one that the little leaflets are opposite. So this is a really easy tree to tell. Yeah, that's what kind of makes it really unique. It has a yellow wood to it. They used it for gun stocks. But this is more of a southern tree and an Appalachian, edge of Appalachian tree. So that's why we don't see a lot of it in Ohio. When we do, it's a sight to behold in the fall. Gorgeous golden fall color. Has these big kind of wisteria-like white blooms on it. There is a horticultural one out today that's got pink blooms on it. And the tree's just loaded with it when they're really healthy and doing really well. It's an absolute showstopper to see them flower. This was reputed to have been one of John Kennedy's favorite trees. But more importantly, this was John Quincy Adams' favorite tree. And John Quincy Adams and John Adams, as many of our founding fathers, all regarded themselves as really down-to-earth farmers. I mean, if you were a plantation owner, you still farmed, right? Well, the farming styles might have been different. What you were growing was different. John Adams felt so strongly that he actually planned like an orchard. He bought this small 4-acre chunk of property, and when he started to plant trees in it, he realized he made a really bad decision because the soil was so rocky that it took him years to plant. And he often said that buying that 4 acres was the bane of his existence. Adams would start every day with a tankard of hard cider. So obviously liked his apple trees really well, liked his orchard. And what's amazing to me is Adams still drank even though one of his sons died from alcoholism. Adams still had a big tankard of hard cider every morning when he got up. We're not sure about his wine, but he did say one time that in wine there is truth. So we think he probably imbibed in a little wine too. His son, John Quincy Adams, holds a special distinction. What is it? Anybody tell me? He's the only president that knew our founding fathers and knew Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, the only president we had that managed to pull that feat off. And John Quincy Adams was extremely enamored with this tree. So much so that he actually brought a yellowwood up from him after he left being president in Washington, D.C. He came up and he planted a yellowwood that's still growing at the home up there in Massachusetts to this day. They were both very fond of oaks. They thought oaks were great, but I think the reason they liked oaks were because of the qualities that they had for furniture and home building, things like that. John Quincy Adams makes a comment to several people, and he says, "I plant for posterity." And they were probably the early Arbor Day people of their age because they both, father and son, acknowledged the importance of trees and the importance of replacing trees. Now, they're not like Madison, where they set aside a chunk. Remember when we talked, Madison sets aside 40 acres. Nothing's going to be done. This is going to stay old growth forest. They never go that far, but they do spend a lifetime planting trees and replacing trees that are cut down. So they do have this marvelous ability just to look ahead and they both realize that you've got to have trees if you want to keep going. So, well, thank you so much. That concludes the talk. And I am always open for suggestions for next year.